we're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's July 11th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dainhong.
Happy 7-Eleven!
Happy 7-Eleven!
7-Eleven!
And Kim Xiong.
I didn't know that was a celebration. Good morning, yeah.
July 11th. Now,
Any reason to celebrate, I think it's good enough.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, it's been very hot for the past couple of days. It's to the point that the planet's average daily temperature reached record highs. For instance, on Thursday, we saw average global temperatures reach 17.23 degrees Celsius. That's why scientists are warning that this year may be the hottest on record. Moving on, as part of efforts to boost marriage rates, local governments in South Korea are holding matchmaking events. That includes Seongnam City in Gyeonggi-do Province, which has held its first matchmaking party for 2 consecutive Sundays. A total of 100 single men and women aged 26 to 38 attended. Among those, 39 couples were made. Now, last but not least, one of the most heated debates going on the internet at the moment is whether women should also be conscripted as part of the country's mandatory military service. This comes as South Korea is seeing one of the lowest birth rates in the world, bringing down the number of people who can actually go to the military. Pollster RealMeter conducted a survey on 503 people from last Thursday and found that 54.9% said they were against women conscription. Now, let me further analyze the survey results for you guys. Among the men surveyed, 56.3% were against women conscription, and 53.4% of women had the same opinion. So it's quite fascinating to see how there isn't much difference in answers on what women and men are saying in this particular survey. Now, where do you stand on this issue, Xiao?
Yeah, I mean, this is indeed quite a hot topic recently. We had the Veterans Month episode 2 weeks ago, I think 26th. And I did mention another poll results. About 3 weeks ago, I think, a poll conducted on twice the sample size as this, 1,006 people, and targeted at the younger generation of ages between 18 to 28, showed that around 62% of men and 50% of women agreed on female conscription. So it does make me quite bedazzled and thinking about how it's changed within that short period of time. I mean, we are still a country technically at war as well. So it does seem maybe not too worrying, but it does open the floor up for some debate.
For me too, I was very fascinated to see that survey results could change in such a short amount of time, but also the fact that it's continuously being debated. Some take it as a gender issue, whether like some men might think that women should go, but there's also women who want to go as well.
Exactly.
There's always ongoing debate about this.
Right.
So I would like to open up the floor and ask you, Cheska, where do you stand in terms of should women be conscripted to the military?
I mean, I also find the poll number quite interesting. And given our geopolitical situation, I don't completely disagree with the conscription, but I have always been an advocate more on the side of the voluntary enlistment, much like they do in the States, with, I would say, added socio-economic welfare benefits and possibly, you know, the veteran benefits as well. I think it would give more pride, purpose, and most importantly, choice for both men and women to serve their country with a little bit of more voluntary involvement rather than just a mandatory training.
In order for that to
sure,
happen, though, infrastructure should be enhanced.
I completely understand, yes.
And that was our news feed for this Tuesday. Let's now move on to today's discussion topic. For the first time in more than 60 years, China saw its population decline. But it's not only China. Other parts of the world, including South Korea, are seeing declining birth rates, which can lead to a smaller population. Today, we'll talk about how this can affect the younger generation. Take a look at the screen to find out more. After finding all 6 Infinity Stones, Thanos snapped his fingers and erased 3.8 billion people from Earth. Though this was a mind-boggling scene from the Marvel movie series Avengers, it seems that this type of population snap could happen in the world we're living in. Earlier this year, China saw its population decrease for the first time in 60 years. South Korea has also seen a record low in fertility rates, making experts worry that the country will see a larger aging population and no new younger generation. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. What does a declining population mean for our society and economy in the long run? 2. What does our generation think about this societal phenomenon? 3. How could this demographic trend affect young people? Today, July 11th, is World Population Day. In light of this day, we aim to take a look at some demographic trends that could affect our generation. Before we do that, though, Cheska, why don't you explain to us what this day is about and where the world's population trends are heading these days?
Absolutely. I know I did a cheeky opening saying, happy 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
But today is actually the World Population Day, designated by the United Nations, to actually celebrate its first 5 billion exceeding in 1987.
Right.
Now, and we're about to about 8 billion. So in commemoration of this Population Day, I would like to give a quick tour of our world's demographic trend. Now, if you take a look at the screen, you can see here that it took just about 70 years for the population to grow over 3 times, while it took about 1,800 years to reach its first billion. So the forecast shows that in about 30 years, the number could go up to about 10 billion. Now, of course, the factors involve better healthcare, infrastructure, and worldwide security. And as we will discuss today, this rapid growth has its own pros and cons.
But rapid growth, but we're also seeing a decline in other countries, like populous countries like China, South Korea, for instance. We have a very low birth rate,
for sure.
which is leading to a decline. Why don't you explain to us?
Yeah, I mean, unlike the world trend, the population in Korea has been decreasing for sure. And for the past 42 months, beginning November 2019, we've seen a population downfall for South Korea. So only a decade ago, though, South Korea had more than 485,000 new births, racking up around a respectable average of 1.3 children per woman of childbearing age. However, last year we saw a record-breaking low birth rate at around 249,000 new births and 0.78 child per capita. So it is quite concerning. South Korea is one of the leading countries in population decline, to be honest, especially the downfall of its birth rates in the country.
And many seem to have different opinions to that matter, whether a declining population could better benefit the whole humankind. I mean, I mentioned in our introductory video about Thanos from Avengers. After I saw this movie, I remember having debates with my friends whether it'd actually be a blessing in disguise to see half the population wiped out, though it's very grim.
Not in that dramatic, evil way.
Not in that dramatic, evil way.
I sometimes say that myself. It could be a good idea if you get randomly chosen, wiped out half. It's quite fair. It's going to save the planet.
Oh my God.
And Thanos was quite fair.
Yeah, it's not done by social class or anything.
Exactly.
You just super fair.
Exactly.
Even Iron Man died.
That's a spoiler alert. You should have done
It's a 5-year-old movie or something.
I will leave that for another discussion about the fairness.
So anywho, experts are saying that a decreasing population and lower birth rate could actually benefit Korean society in the long run. So what do you think about this, Cheska? Could you tell us a little bit more?
Absolutely. So again, to preface, not as evil or as destructive as Thanos, but there are always 2 sides to every story. And some experts say that the steadiness or slowing down of this population growth is first and foremost not only inevitable, but actually an optimistic story. Now, to touch upon a more macro level, we're talking about less strain on the environment, natural resources being allocated to more people, and also the benefit of the urban sprawl also declining. And these are some of the benefits that can be expected only through population decline, or at least steadiness of population growth. Now, not to mention the daunting accumulation of trash mountains that have been happening, which will be dramatically reduced. Now, while some argue that the decline in economic growth could potentially be a reason, Xion will explain more in detail, but actually GDP per person will either remain the same or actually increase.
Oh yeah, mathematically.
Mathematically, right? Because more natural resources will be allocated to less people.
Xion, why don't you add on to that?
I mean, so I'd like to start with what would be the main argument, right? With some of the experts and academics have been always saying as well, a decrease in population reduces competitors for finite ecological resources. I mean, this has been supported by experts like Professor Wang Feng at UC Irvine, as well as Joel Lee Cohen of Rockefeller University, voicing their opinion that population decline is indeed a benefit for mankind. And for example, Finland has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, 1.39 per capita, and it is the happiest country in the world. I don't think it matters whether, socially, to be happy, you need more children.
There's absolutely no
correlation. It doesn't make sense. And when resources and goods are finite, the population must stay the same or have decrease in a decreasing trend to guarantee the costs such as education, health, to be spent on an individual. I mean, that's what these experts often say, and I kind of agree to it, to be honest. Yeah.
And speaking of you agreeing to it, I want to now open up the room to ask where do you stand on this issue then? Would a declining population benefit us, or what do you think about this demographic trend? Starting with you, Xiang.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't think our generation has yet the time or capacity to actually think about population decrease and things like that. We're all working individuals, you know, we've got to live out our youths as well, and that's taking up a lot of time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we put those concerns about the population in the back of the queue, but we should think about a few things. I mean, all in all, I think there are two sides, two opinions to this idea, and population should decline. You know, it might be too difficult to raise a child, or people thinking population decline is a positive as it gives hopes of restoring the Earth to its original sort of environment. The second position would be that population should continue to increase, meaning with concerns over elderly care and losing labor force for countries with population decline like Korea. And to be honest, like the top 20 countries with the highest fertility rates are the least developing countries, the least developed countries in Africa, except for Afghanistan actually. The whole 20 on the list is in Africa. They are, you know, living in poor living conditions as well as lack of food, education and things like that. And I think there should be a certain level of population control to guarantee a decent living standard for all children and people around the world.
That's definitely a compelling argument. Where do you stand on this issue, Cheska?
I think I can derive some of the narratives, or at least stories that I heard from people in my generation.
Right.
But I think for us, the senior plan or the global trend is more sequential, meaning that first, it's like Maslow's law of hierarchy. First, there are necessities that must be fulfilled in order for us to think about the global trend and the society. Now, given the competition that we have, the career development and the ambition that our young generation have, it is almost strenuous to think about having to raise children or think about having more children, you know, to balance out the career plans or the, you know, the life ambitions they may have. So I think given the situation that we're at, it is very difficult to think about the dwindling population growth or how it might affect us down the road.
But do you think it's positive? Do you think it's a benefit for the population to decline, or do you think
where
it's
do you
a
stand?
bad
Do you
thing?
think it's a positive direction, or do you think we should be cautious about a shrinking population in the long run? Because eventually we are all going to age.
Absolutely.
We might not be able to work very soon.
Absolutely, I agree.
So what do you think about that? You think Thanos? Wow.
I'm joking. But I
Evil Jessica killing half of the population.
the Arirang program shuts down.
No, but it's such a tricky question. That's why we asked the same question to our viewers, whether they think a declining population could benefit our generation or harm us. So take a look at the screen to find out what three of them had to say. So we start with Ashika. She said, yeah, I do believe we need to decrease the population. I am from India, one of the most populated countries in the world. I would say things become hard and you need to compete for almost everything. Magic Flying Carpet said the problem is that population decreases disproportionately. As the whole population decreases, the young working generation decreases faster than the old generation due to the low birth rate. Gazelle said in terms of the environment, it may be very necessary in terms of some nations' economies. It will change their societies. Immigration policies will need to evolve. And I hope if time allows it, we will be able to talk about how immigration policies could be evolving.
I think that's a very interesting
affected with this demographic trend. But before then, we're going to hear from a demographics expert to hear what he has to say. We'll include him in our talks right after this. We're now going to include a demographics expert in our talks. It's Zach W. Amkist, who is currently the editor-in-chief for the Journal of Mathematical Sociology. He's also an associate professor in sociology at Washington University. Welcome, Professor Amkist.
Welcome back, Zach.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, I'd like to ask you the first question. As a sociology expert who specializes in demographics research, what are the pros and cons of seeing a population decline?
I think one of the big pros, and you guys have touched on this, is reduced environmental impact, right? We're seeing a lot of effects on climate change. It's been a lot hotter. We've seen more disasters. Anything that reduces that is, I think, generally a positive. And then reduced competition always seems very positive. You know, we've had a huge housing impact here in the US, and people are always worried about housing. And so lowering that competition, I think, seems like a big boon. Economics, though, is like very unclear, right? That transition from a higher population to a lower population could be very painful. You know, we could have a lot of elderly people and not enough workers to support them. And that sort of like transition. We could also imagine a much larger urbanization transition. So more people, like as we get fewer people, they might actually converge into a smaller area. I think things in that area are like definitely problematic. And then last thing I was thinking of that's like more mixed is migration policy. Countries feel very different about how they should handle migration and what it means for their culture and self-image. And I think that's a really big question going forward.
And I think you touched upon a lot of interesting things, but based on our current demographic trend, and you know, there's a lot of talk about growing senior population, and as you mentioned, like migration in the future, what are some potential consequences that might affect our generation?
So I think it's going to be really varied across countries. I think one of the biggest ones is as the population changes and ages and shrinks, schools won't be needed as much, right? So, like you're going to see a reduction in colleges. You're going to see spaces that your elementary school is now turned into a park or a mall. I think those are going to be like really visible changes that we're going to experience. Hopefully we'll also see property decline in the like cost. So the ability to buy into housing should hopefully get easier, but it's not going to be evenly spread over the world, right? We expect parts of the world to continue growing for a while yet.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this also might be a bit far-fetched. I guess what you've talked about will be quite, you know, impacts that we'll see quite soon in our lives. You know, declining school system. There'll be less children in schools, more elderly care costs and things like that. But as a academic, what would you say the global population would be in the future? What do you think it will end up being? And are there any things you're looking forward to seeing in this area? Seeing a general population decline maybe in 100 years or things like that?
And if I may add on, what would you like to see in terms of migration policies for different countries?
So I think you've touched on some really interesting things. And your point, right, the UN expects population to sort of plateau at 2100, right? So, you know, more than 70 years from now. But as you've mentioned, right, the UN projections had South Korea growing still, and has generally had a big offset because of COVID and other sort of like potential disasters and unknown. I mean, predicting the future is just really hard, right? Certainly the population is going to continue to grow for the next 20 years or so. It could easily start plateauing sooner than the UN expects.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier as well, I mean, sort of less developed countries seem to have a higher fertility rate. And do you think as those countries become more economically developed, we'll see a decline in fertility rate in the developing area as well? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, for sure. That's the expectation. Academics call this the demographic transition. As places get more developed, have more money, have more education, you tend to see people have less kids. And that should also kind of leads nicely to the big like question about immigration, right? As countries, you know, countries that are more developed and have a lot of need for a larger workforce are declining, you can imagine, you know, really uplifting and changing the population of the world by moving people around to places that need it. So, you know, I'm generally pro-migration. I love working with my colleagues who've moved from elsewhere. I love my experience when I've worked in other places. But, you know, it's always hugely controversial.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see more discussions happen on this front. Thank you so much, Professor Amkis. It was a pleasure to have you here today on our show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zach.
And as the professor mentioned, and as our viewer mentioned as well, one solution to this declining population problem could be like we would have to see evolving migration policies. Where do you stand on that, Jiyoung?
I mean, migration itself is another issue. Obviously, Korea itself has been very limited for immigrants coming into the country. It's very difficult to be naturalized, very difficult to keep your visa as well, even if you're a highly educated individual who went to school in Korea and everything. For foreigners. I mean, low birth rates have obvious consequences, first of all, like the economic decline due to reduced workforce, as well as aging population, consequently causing an increase in healthcare, as well as a decrease in taxable income from its citizens for public goods. So I think one of the key key sort of transition Korea can make is either we become a fully automated, super high-tech industry where even sort of the older generation can continue these, manual labors and things like that, or have a large-scale immigration policy coming in, letting in the immigrants, having a mixed pot of culture and things like that. But we'll have to see about that.
Yeah, another idea to that I think we mentioned during the rehearsal was unification, because the two Koreas are divided. It is very tricky though, because there's so many different factors to consider, but that's some of the ideas that some people have. What about you, Cheska?
Absolutely, and I think United States being an immigrant country,
Exactly, yeah.
I think more diversity
countries,
should definitely be promoted and encouraged, I think, down the future. And I think, as Professor mentioned, migration and more integration, becoming a global citizen, not just tied to one country, is probably one way. But also, just speaking of our generation, regardless of the rate at the population growth, the unchangeable thing is that when we become seniors, it is very possible that the senior population will outgrow the working population.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's very, very important to implement some of the social welfare structure and possibly individual work to make sure that we have a safe and very happy senior life in the future as well.
In order for that to happen, hopefully discussions like this can actually bring that together.
I hope so too.
All right, and we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dainhal.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And Kim Jiyoung.
My pleasure.
Now, thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.